Hockey screenwriter's dream a reality. Project.
Super Bowl XVIII is in the record books, and the Los Angeles Raiders are world champions. Marcus Allen put on the greatest show on earth by exploding for a record 191 yards on the ground. Derek Jensen had a day to remember with a startling block punt to get the Raider ball rolling. And Jack Squirick turned the most mysterious call in Super Bowl history into an unforgettable interception and touchdown. We salute Tom Flores and the Los Angeles Raiders. Their dominance in Super Bowl XVIII exemplified their commitment to excellence.
Now from our HBO studios in New York, here are your hosts, Len Dawson and Nick Bonacani.
Hello, everybody. Nick and I would like to welcome you to our Super Bowl show, the last Inside the NFL show of the year. Besides all the highlights of Super Bowl XVIII, we'll present our NFL record book, which is our selections as best of the year. Nick, Super Bowl XVIII. Tremendous build-up. It was billed as the best matchup in the history of all the Super Bowls, but when the game was played, it was a complete bust.
Len, the Raiders were absolutely devastating in every aspect of the game. As far as the Redskins were concerned, they were absolutely bewildered, so much so that on occasion they didn't have enough players on the field, and then when they made substitutions, those players just about made it on the field before the ball was snapped. And if they had a game plan, it was throw the ball up in the air and hope.
I think you're absolutely right. You know, when the Los Angeles Raider cornerbacks completely shut out the wide receivers for the Redskins, it looked like Washington did not have an alternate game plan. But, you know, rather than belittle the Washington Redskins because they are a tremendous football team, I think the credit should go to Tom Flores and his coaching staff. I don't believe, at least up until now, that Tom Flores has received the recognition that he deserves. You know, when you look at how the Raiders handled everything that the Washington Redskins did, you would think maybe that Joe Gibbs invited one of the assistant coaches from Tom Flores over for the meetings during the week.
Well, we know what a great day that Marcus Allen, the running back of the Raiders, had. 191 yards rushing and selected the most valuable player of Super Bowl XVIII. But how about quarterback Jim Plunkett? What a fantastic day for him. Everybody said he was inconsistent. Well, he was so consistent that it looked like he had Washington playing his defenses. And when you got to the second half, he was just toying around with Washington until the clock ran out. Well, Jim Plunkett is one of the few quarterbacks in the National Football League that calls his own plays. Well, the plays he called on Sunday were so good that Tom Flores was crediting him with a Raiders win.
The Super Bowl, the game, the high point of a playing career. The Skylab 3 astronauts saw it from space in 1974. Gerald Ford watched it from Jerusalem in 1979. And last Sunday, the LA Raiders and Washington Redskins squared off in front of over 100 million to vie for a 20-inch high, 7-pound piece of sterling silver known as the Lombardi Trophy in Super Bowl XVIII. The Raiders, the dark side of the force, had earned the right to play in their 4th Super Bowl. The Redskins, a hard-working lunch pail gang, had fashioned pro football's best record and the right to play in their 3rd World Championship. The evil, sinister, intimidating image of the silver and black in startling contrast to the lovable band of hogs and smurfs from the nation's capital. Two teams worlds apart, but both with their sights set on a world championship ring. For young Marcus Allen, this was his first Super Bowl, and indeed he would play a key role in deciding the winner. For the Redskins, this was their second straight, and they knew that getting to be #1 is one thing, but staying there requires much more. They knew this Super Bowl would be a stern test. The Raider defense is a punishing unit, and at the heart of that defense are a pair of big, strong linebackers, Bob Nelson, number 51, and Matt Millen, number 55. Their size makes L.A. tough up the middle. And in the first quarter, John Riggins drew the unenviable task of attacking that stubborn middle. Kept knocking, but the door was locked tight. And when the Skins tried to pass, number 53, Rod Martin, and tight coverage downfield spelled pain for Joe Theismann. Joe Gibbs' record-setting offense sputtered. In fact, the closest Washington came to a touchdown was when number 48, Ken Coffey, nearly picked off Jim Plunkett's second pass of the game, with clear sailing ahead. The Raider offense had its share of problems early, too, as all three of their possessions ended with booming Ray Guy punts. There were some light moments in this, the greatest of games, as the Raiders had a small problem with their kicking game in the first quarter. But indeed, the kicking game was an important factor early in Super Bowl 18. The Raiders accidentally touched a Redskin punt and allowed Washington to keep the ball. But when the drive came to a halt, Mark Mosley's right foot let him down. The kicking game continued to be an instrumental facet in the quarter. Certainly the biggest play came when little-known Derek Jensen, number 31, came up with a special teams gem by blocking a Jeff Hayes punt for the only score in the first period. The first time since Minnesota's Matt Blair performed his magic in Super Bowl IX that a blocked punt was recovered for a touchdown. This one was set up when Jensen took an inside route toward Hayes, and Clint Didier, number 86, had to pick up the Raider rush from the wing. Jensen found no one between himself and the unfortunate Hayes, and the result was a 7-0 L.A. Raider advantage. Lester Hayes and the Raiders had taken the first step toward what would become a truly silver and black Sunday. For now, they led by only 7, but already Washington's grave was being dug.
Lester Hayes is happy, and why not? His team is ahead, and the wide receivers for the Washington Redskins are being shut down. The Redskins are not happy, particularly our next guest, who's joining us via the satellite from Hawaii, where he's taking part in this week's Pro Bowl game. He's All-Pro defensive tackle Dave Butts of the Washington Redskins. Dave, thank you for joining us, and congratulations. We here at HBO Sports feel that this past season was your best ever. Let me ask you this about that blocked punt. What effect did it have on your team?
Well, I think it was something that was very disappointing. It's something that we have done to other teams all season long. And it just seemed like it took forever for him to get the punt off. And a lot of credit is due to the Raiders because we didn't really believe that they were going to be coming after our punts. The coach said that they hadn't shown it that much. And all of a sudden, here they are blocking a punt and falling out in the end zone for a touchdown.
Dave, the offensive line of the L.A. Raiders, were they that good, number one? And number two, Mickey Marvin in particular, the job against you. For the second game in a row, you didn't have a sack. Can you make a comment on that?
Well, necessarily, Mickey Marvin's a very good athlete. He's a big ball player, a big guard at 270, and I thought did a good job. There was, all defensive players say there was a little bit of holding going on. I believe there was one arm tackle in the game that wasn't called, but on the whole, he did a very good job. I thought their offensive line was very aggressive, came out and got into us very well. Again, I thought they changed up their offense a little bit. They kind of went to a Green Bay 49er type of offense, in which they threw the ball so quickly that we had a hard time getting to them. In fact, the one sack, or I believe we had one sack during the game, that came with pressure with him, making him step up in the middle.
Dave, your defensive team did an outstanding job against the running game of other teams all year long. How do you account for Marcus Allen's 191 yards rushing?
Well, it's just he had a phenomenal day. He did an excellent job. We knew going into the game that he always didn't run to where the play was designed, that he cut back and just all of a sudden take off like a scared rabbit. He wasn't scared at all, and I tell you what, he really took off on us a couple of times when we've been holding Dorset and a few others to 16 and 33 yards a game. All of a sudden, here's a guy that has more yardage on us than 5 or 6 games of running the ball.
David, Joe Theismann's performance early in the game was not good. Did this put added pressure on your defense?
Well, I'll tell you what, our offense was completely frustrated there a little bit. Very hard to get things going. You shut down John Riggins, you shut down half our offense. And with them bringing the linebackers up as close to the line of scrimmage as they did, the offensive line could not create the holes that they normally did because it was filled by a linebacker. And John was met many, many times on the line of scrimmage. And I don't care how big you are or how good you are, you're not going to get a lot of yardage by carrying people from the line of scrimmage. So that was a problem, and then our receivers were blanketed very well by their defensive backs. So it made for a very long and hard day for us to get anything going. And then all the mistakes that we had, they turned everyone over for an advantage.
Dave, please stay with us, because after we take a look at the highlights of the second quarter, we'd like to come back and talk with you. Two key players for the Washington Redskins are Joe Theismann and this man, John Riggins. As John goes, so goes the Washington Redskins. John did go, but not nearly far enough.
Early in the second period, the Redskin defense accomplished something unusual. They stopped Marcus Allen. In a combined effort, tackle Perry Brooks took the inside route toward the ball carrier. When Allen found his path to the outside, blocked by cornerback Vernon Dean, he tried to reverse his direction, but was smothered by Brooks for his only loss of the day. Washington had little success stopping Allen, while Los Angeles had little trouble containing John Riggins. With their defensive ends spread out wide and with 4 linebackers filling the gaps, L.A. held the Diesel to 39 first-half yards on 17 carries. And with the Raider defensive backs draped over Redskin receivers, Joe Theismann had nowhere to throw, nowhere to run, and nowhere to hide. This was hardly the same Washington team that set a league record for points scored in a season, but it became a typical Raider performance when Los Angeles turned to what they do best, throw deep. When wide receiver Cliff Branch gathered in the 50-yard pass, he symbolized the Raiders' unique style of attack football. Expand the limits of the field offensively while stretching the limits of a defense. The play also put to rest the claim that Jim Plunkett could not throw into the stiff wind coming off the Gulf Coast. Historically, the Raiders have lived and died with the bomb. On this Sunday in January, they won with it. 2 plays later, Branch went for the post, and his 12-yard touchdown pass put the Raiders ahead 14-0. Washington sliced that lead to 14-3 and appeared to be in decent position for a second-half comeback. But the roof caved in just before intermission, thanks to the alert play of a little-known linebacker, Jack Squirick. From the Redskins' 12-yard line, Squirick anticipated a screen pass, then easily stepped in front of a poorly thrown Theismann pass to score the Raiders' 3rd touchdown with just 7 seconds left in the half. The Raiders went into zone coverage on the play, with one exception. Squirick was assigned to cover Joe Washington man-to-man and to look for the screen. Theismann looked toward his 3 receivers to the right, but Raider defenders did not take the fake. Looking back, number 7 failed to see the charging Squirick, and a routine screen pass turned into a Redskin nightmare. Went up 21-3, and the Redskins went down for the count. It is said that big plays win Super Bowls, and in the first half, the Raiders got big plays from their defense, offense, and special teams, all leading to touchdowns. The celebration had just begun for the Silver and Black.
The Raiders had to be both grateful and surprised at that play being called under those circumstances. But for Joe Theismann, it just capped off a miserable first half. We're back with Dave Butts, his all-pro defensive tackle for the Washington Redskins. And Dave, for my first question to you in this segment is, how did you feel on the sideline when that play was called?
Well, personally, I couldn't believe that they'd call something in the air to the sidelines that close to the end zone. I thought with the waning seconds the way they were, that they should have gone a little bit deeper with it. In case it were to be intercepted, they might have a chance of stopping someone. But when you throw it that close and you throw it from sideline to sideline, like they did over defensive people, Joe said, I know he didn't see him because there were people in his way, but still, and I would go personally and would have liked to have seen him gone a lot deeper with it.
Let's talk about halftime. When he went into the locker room, what did Joe Gibbs say to the team?
Okay, well, at halftime, it was a deal in which there was a little bit of confusion, a little bit of frustration on a lot of the ball players on our team, in the fact that we couldn't get anything going, and every mistake that we made, the Raiders had turned into points. That was a very disheartening thing. Coach Gibbs came in and said, you know, hey, we've been down before. We can come back if we get together and not make the mistakes that we made in the first half. It still was a steep hill to climb, but we were ready to do it the second half, and I think when we came out and made the long drive, we were ready to play some football again. But the bad part about it is that extra point that was blocked. We never have extra points blocked.
Dave, for me personally, when we were beaten by the Raiders 28-26 when I played with the Dolphins in a playoff game, that to me spelled the end of the Dolphin dynasty. Now, your Washington Redskin football team was pretty well humiliated in that game against the Raiders. Do you think this is going to spell the end to a powerhouse Redskin team?
Well, no, not really. I think if we have some problems with some people that our contracts are running out, I think if the Redskins can get them back, and if John Riggins is of an attitude that he wants to play one more year with us, the way he has, we're still a good team. Part of the problem in our game here is we need a little bit more depth. Darrell Grant during the game got knocked out for a couple of plays and never was quite right after the first half, so that affected us. We need a little bit more depth in some places, but on the whole, we don't have to answer anybody. We had a 14-2 season record. We were undefeated. We would have been undefeated. We only took 4 points for us to be undefeated. So we had a good year, and we made it to the Super Bowl, and that's what you know, all the other teams try to do.
Dave, we want to personally thank you very much for taking time to join us on our show, and we certainly hope you enjoy your stay in Hawaii.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoy you asking me, and we're looking forward to get out on the beach a little bit.
Tom Flores, we here at Inside the NFL on HBO Sports have known all along that you are an outstanding coach. And we suggest to you that you get a good PR man so the rest of the world finds out about it. So now let's sit back, relax, and take a look at the second half where you literally ran over the Redskins.
As the two teams took to the field for the second half at Tampa, one thing was certain. If Washington was going to get back into this game, they had to score soon. For Joe Theismann and the Redskins, their first possession was soon enough. For the first time all day, Theismann successfully worked the corners of the Raiders secondary, hitting on first down strikes to his all-pro wide receiver Charlie Brown and to his all-purpose running back Nick Giaquinto, number 30. The Redskins moved methodically into Raider territory, and when John Riggins capped off their 9-play, 70-yard drive with his 1-yard plunge into the end zone, the Redskins, it seemed, had clawed their way back into it. This was the kind of drive that was second nature to the Redskins, the kind their fans had come to take for granted all year long. But the Redskins' sudden return to form did not stem the rising tide of misfortune that almost swept them away for good in the first half. The ensuing extra point try by Mark Mosley was blocked. And on LA's next possession, a 38-yard pass interference penalty presented the Raiders a golden opportunity to nullify Riggins' score. Working the ball underneath the secondary he had burned deep in the first half, Jim Plunkett hit on short tosses to tight end Todd Christensen and to running back Frank Hawkins, number 27. Once inside the 10-yard line, Plunkett took the ball out of the air and into the arms of Marcus Allen, number 32. Marcus Allen's dance hall shuffle may differ drastically from John Riggins' brawling barroom ballet. But down under the goal line, Marvelous Marcus is every bit as dangerous as the Diesel. Allen's 5-yard touchdown run only 3 minutes after Riggins' score put added pressure on Joe Theismann to move the Redskins. But with Washington showing pass on just about every down, the relentless Raider pass rush had no need to be wary of the run. As they had done most of the game, the LA defense bit into and chewed up the Hogs as if they were feasting on some tasty morsels of smoked sausage. Once again, the Redskins were reeling, but a last faint glimmer of hope appeared when LA wide receiver Cliff Branch, number 21, coughed up the football on the Raider 35. The Redskins recovered. 3 plays and 9 yards later, with the ball at the LA 26, it was 4th and 1. And just about everybody wearing the silver and black knew who was going to get the football. It was perhaps most symbolic that the Redskins came up empty-handed on what was probably their best bread and butter play. Riggins into the left side of the line. Another look at the play reveals that it was an apparent mismatch between all-pro linebacker Rod Martin and Redskin reserve tight end Rich Walker that sealed off Riggins' route and brought on a swarm of Raiders. In last year's Super Bowl, a similar 4th and 1 Riggins run breathed new life into the Redskins. 1 year later, it simply squeezed out what last gasp of air that was still left in Washington's attack. For all intents and purposes, the Redskins were dead. On the very next play from scrimmage, Marcus Allen buried them. 74-yard touchdown run broke the game wide open and broke one of the Super Bowl's oldest records. Allen's run surpasses Tom Mattey's 58-yard jaunt against the Jets in Super Bowl III, a mark that had stood for 15 years. It was also the longest Super Bowl touchdown run from scrimmage, wiping out a record that John Riggins held for just 1 year. But when historians look back to this gem of a play by Allen sometime in the coming years, they will have a field day trying to figure out how it happened. The play was designed for Allen to go inside, but when Marcus had thoughts of going wide and turning the corner, a wildly pursuing Redskin defense seemingly had him trapped. But cutting back against the grain is one of Allen's deadliest weapons. Marcus left a stunned Redskin and a somewhat surprised Raider team simply standing still. If the Redskins had never seen a reverse field run like this before, there was good reason. Allen was absent from their early season encounter. In this game, he was the difference between a simple Raider win and a rousing Raider rout. The quarter ended on the record run, and for the Redskins, they still had a painful 15 minutes left to ponder it all. For Marcus Allen and the Raiders, all that remained was an all-out assault on the Super Bowl record book.
Marcus, congratulations on the most outstanding performance by a running back in the history of the Super Bowl games. In your first Super Bowl, here are the records you broke. Most yards rushing in a game, 191. The longest run from scrimmage, 74 yards. And the most total yards in a game, 209. Now that definitely is an MVP performance. The inspirational leader of the World Championship team is Lyle Alzado. And Lyle is going to join us via the satellite from Los Angeles. Lyle, thank you very much for joining us, and congratulations on finally winning the ring, the big one, the Super Bowl. And you've been fighting in the trenches, you know, for a lot of years. How do you feel about winning it all right now?
Well, you know, I've been a football player or an athlete for about 25 or 26 years, and I've been on division championship teams. I've been on some state championship teams, but nothing that ever made me absolutely number one. And in college, I was never on a national championship team. I've been in the playoffs with Denver and Cleveland, and of course last year with the Raiders. But I've never been involved in a world championship. I've gone to the Super Bowl with Denver, and of course Dallas beat us there in 1977. And yet this time here, you know, I got the chance to be on a world championship team, and it's the ultimate in football and sports to be number one. And finally, as my 13th year, I've accomplished that.
Lyle, this is the situation. It's the third quarter. The Redskins are on a drive, a very important drive for them. It's 4th down and 1. They give the ball to John Riggins behind Jacoby and Grimm, right at Lyle Alzado. You come up, you stuff them, and you stuff Riggins. You stop them cold. How did the Raiders do it all day long when no other team in the National Football League was able to do it?
Well, what we did is we have what we call an orange-tight defense, which lines up the ends, head up on the tackles, and of course Reggie Kinlaw, our noseman's head up on the center. Our outside linebackers stay pretty tight on the outside lane, and we have force by our cornerbacks. And what happened was, as soon as the ball is snapped, the defensive ends head up on the tackles and try and close down the gaps to the outside. The linebackers force it outside, and the cornerback comes up and forces it. And they made the hit. Actually, I didn't. I just got in the way of the offensive lineman, and you know, Jacoby and Grimm, and Rod Martin and Mike Caines came up and made the hit. But in actuality, I wasn't part of the tackle. They were.
Lyle, the league's most valuable player, Joe Theismann, did not have a good day. And after the game, he said he was never rattled during the ball game. You were in his face all day long. Did you read him that way?
Well, I don't think he got rattled. I think that I think he got more frustrated than he did get rattled. You know, he kept pursuing and trying to get the ball to his receivers, but it's difficult to throw the ball when you have cornerbacks like Hayes and you know, Michael Hayes and Lester Hayes, and of course McElroy and Mike Davis back there. He couldn't get the ball completed to his receivers. They were being covered like a blanket, and once we stopped their ground game, we thought we had the game won.
Lyle, did Haynes and Hayes do anything special during the week to prepare for Art Monk and Charlie Brown?
Actually, I don't really think so. You know, I don't really know. I know that Mike Haynes told me during the week that he was going to shut Charlie Brown down totally. That's a heck of a statement to cover a good wide receiver like Brown, and yet, as good as Mike Haynes is, I didn't have any doubts that he could possibly do that, and he did just that, because he was their key receiver, and Mike just was all over him.
Lyle, stay with us, because after we show the conclusion of the game, we would like to talk to you some more.
Okay.
Right now, let's turn our attention to the continuation of the onslaught by the Raiders.
If you're going to taunt an opponent, you'd better be good enough to back it up. By holding Redskin wideouts to only 2 catches after 3 quarters, Raider defensive backs certainly proved that. Art Monk's reception as the 4th quarter got underway was one of the few bones the Los Angeles defense threw the Redskins' direction. However, upset by their own generosity, the Raiders decided to retrieve what they had given up. Number 56, Jeff Barnes, buried Joe Theismann to end another Washington drive before it even really got started. The Raiders' 4th sack of the day was the result of pressure by Rod Martin and Howie Long that forced Theismann into Barnes' open arm. The Redskin passing game wasn't totally denied, however, as 2 series later, Charlie Brown surprised everybody, including himself, by finally beating Mike Haynes deep. With a 1st and 10 on the Los Angeles 11-yard line, the Redskins were knocking at the Raiders' door. However, 4 plays later, it was poor Joe Theismann who had his bell rung. The hit by Mike Davis, number 36, caused a fumble that was recovered by the Raiders' Rod Martin. Prior to the game, Washington was labeled a mistake-proof team that frequently takes away the ball but rarely gives it up. However, last Sunday, the turnover-rich Redskins encountered Robin Hood dressed in silver and black. Theft wasn't as costly to the Redskins as Theismann's first errant pass, but for a competitor like number 7, it was just as tough to swallow. Theismann was named the league's most valuable player for the '83 season. But in Super Bowl 18, he and the Redskin defense stepped aside for Marcus Allen, number 32. Allen's 39-yard run late in the final period gave him a total of 191 yards, breaking John Riggins' record set a year ago. Selected the game's MVP, Allen moved the Raiders to their final score as Chris Barr kicked a 21-yard field goal. With just over 2 minutes remaining and the score 38-9, Raider defensive end Greg Townsend, number 93, had no intentions of allowing Washington to gain even the smallest measure of self-respect. In a game predicted to be the finest Super Bowl in years, the Raiders had out-intimidated, outplayed, and outscored the Washington Redskins. Los Angeles' 38-9 win marked the most one-sided victory in Super Bowl history, as well as the most points ever scored by any team. The Redskins, the first team to play in 2 consecutive Super Bowls since the '79 Steelers, will not have fond memories of their second trip. Super Bowl 18 wasn't fun in the Florida sun. It was silver and black Sunday. Los Angeles now has 3 Super Bowl rings to show for their 4 Super Bowl appearances. In today's highly technical game, the Raiders are the league's rebels. They've proven they can still win by simply beating you to the ground, then stepping over you. Los Angeles is the winningest team in all of professional sports. And in Super Bowl 18, by soundly defeating the best the NFL had to offer, the Raiders continued their proud winning tradition.
Tom Flores deserves to be carried off the field by his players. But I'll bet you they are very happy that he's the head coach and not the ex-Raider head coach turned commentator, Tiny John Madden. We are now back with defensive end of the Los Angeles Raiders, Lyle Alzado. And Lyle, the first question I have to ask you is the role that Al Davis and Tom Flores play on the team. Is there a separation, and does Tom Flores have control of the football end of the game?
Let's put it this way. Al Davis makes a lot of the decisions for the front office, how he wants things run. And I don't know totally, because I'm not in their meetings, but this is what the players feel. He makes most of the decisions about running the organization. However, the on-field command is done by Coach Flores. All the on-field decisions is made by him. And, you know, the principle and philosophy that Al Davis has brought to the Raiders ever since he started this organization is one that's always stayed here. And each coach that he has hired has obviously taken to that philosophy and brought it down to the players, or to the players. So as far as making decisions on the field are concerned about players, Tom does all of that.
Lyle, Al Davis after the game said, "This is the best Raider team ever." When a statement like that is made, generally people say, "Hey, what about a dynasty?" Names like the Packers, the Dolphins, the Steelers come up. Do you think that this Raider team is in a position in the next couple of years to be called a dynasty?
That's difficult to say. When you talk about a dynasty, you talk about Miami going 17-0. You talk about the Steelers dominating football in the 70s, but yet we've won one Super Bowl. So I wouldn't call it a dynasty. I don't know if I don't know if any team has the capability of dominating football like it once was dominated by teams like Miami and Pittsburgh. But I don't know. It's just difficult to determine that. We have a lot of good athletes, a lot of young athletes, guys that are getting a little older now, and guys that can be replaced and yet be replaced with good people. But that doesn't mean you can start a dynasty. There's a lot of intangibles involved in doing something like that.
Lyle, what makes the L.A. Raiders a unique football team, so much so that they're really different from the rest of the teams in the National Football League?
Well, there's a lot of things that make the Los Angeles Raiders different from other teams. Number one is the principle behind the organization is to leave the players alone. I was with Denver and I was with Cleveland, and yet they were good organizations. However, they did things and said things to nitpick at players. Here they don't do that. If a meeting is called at 1 o'clock and guys are a few minutes late, they're not yelled at or fined. They're just told to try and please be on time. They're treated like men. And in retrospect they act like men, most of us. So I think with that kind of principle, that kind of philosophy, guys tend to want to play a little harder for the people that treat them as men, as grown-ups. You know, when you treat somebody like a kid, they're going to act like kids.
Well, let's talk about you and your future. Are you considering retiring?
When I was on the sideline during the game against Washington, I watched the clock tick down, and all these thoughts went through my mind as I wanted the clock to hurry up and tick down so the game would be over so I could finally be on a world championship team. And yet, while I was thinking about those things, I thought that maybe it was time for me to give up football and go on to something else. This is the way an athlete should go out, as a winner and a world champion. And yet, as the days have passed since the Super Bowl, I've kind of thought that if I did do that and they still needed me to play, I'd be letting those people down. And yet I don't want to let myself down either. I want to go out as a player that will be remembered as a player who could still do the job. I've never claimed to be a great defensive end. I've never been that, and I never will be that. However, I can do the job, and I want to remain that way. I want to remain that type of player. I don't want to go out when people say, "Well, he got beat up, he got handled by this guy or that guy." I don't want to ever have that happen to me. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just going to wait till things calm down. I favored retirement earlier, a couple of days ago, after the Super Bowl and yesterday. And yet now today I think about coming back and playing out my contract for the next 2 years. So I don't think I'm going to retire, but there's always the possibility of it. I don't know.
Thank you very much, and congratulations. I know no one worked any harder than you to win a Super Bowl game.
Well, you two guys have been on world championship teams, so you know what I'm feeling.
After the game, Larry Merchant visited the Raiders locker room and filed this report on Super Bowl 18.
Have you ever wondered why the Super Bowl usually delivers a little less than it's promised, while the World Series frequently delivers more? Well, I have. And I guess the distinguishing characteristic of this Super Bowl, for me, is that I think I finally got it figured out. It has to do with the nature of football and this game. The nature of football is that two good defensive teams are always going to get into the Super Bowl. And when one of them falls behind, the other one has an awfully difficult time overcoming it. Only 3 teams that didn't score first have won any of the 18 Super Bowls. The other has to do with the nature of the buildup of the Super Bowl. By Tuesday, when we had Media Day, I was already thinking of putting myself on one of those injured lists, determining whether I was probable or questionable or doubtful for the game. By the time we got to the weekend, I took myself off that list. I was really into the game, and I saw that so were the fans. On Super Saturday, I happened to be in the vicinity of the Tampa Bay Stadium, and I saw a remarkable thing. Many thousands of the fans who would fill the game on Super Sunday were already there. The Raiders and the Redskins had had a super week as well. Never in the history of this game have 2 teams seemed to dive into the hype with as much enthusiasm, as much raucous craziness as they did. So the party is over, and the game is over, and the season is over, and so too is the short and happy reign of the Washington Redskins over. The Los Angeles Raiders have established themselves as the first really great team of the 80s. And they did it with defense, basically, proving, even in this age of offensive mindedness, that it was still possible to put together a great defensive team. In fact, I thought any one of a number of Raider defenders should have been named most valuable player in this game. It was also a triumph for old-fashioned, straight-ahead, aggressive football over the razzle-dazzle football that the Redskins have majored in since Joe Gibbs arrived on the scene. Razzle-dazzle that backfired at the end of the first half on that ill-chosen screen pass that resulted in a touchdown that put the game out of reach. And finally, it was a triumph of the best athletes, as symbolized by Ray Guy's amazing one-handed grab of a bad snap from center on a punt, saving much embarrassment and many yards for the Raiders. Conversely, a bad snap from center for the Redskins contributed to a blocked punt that gave the Raiders their first touchdown. The National Football League was hoping that this game would end the season with a great dramatic flourish. It didn't happen that way because it seldom happens in the Super Bowl. Now we can start to try to figure out how the New York Mets managed to lose Tom Seaver to the Chicago White Sox. I'm Larry Merchant for Inside the NFL.
For most of the football fans, it was probably good that the Los Angeles Raiders, who are brash, loud, confident, and winners in every sense of the word, won the game on Sunday. It is easier for mid-America to identify themselves with the Raiders than the more establishment team, the Washington Redskins. I know I picked the Redskins on Sunday, and I have no regret. They're a great football team. But I love those Raiders, and I love everything they stand for. They excel because they have a commitment to excellence.
Nick, I can't buy all of that. You can't get more down the earth than the Hogs or John Regan's in battle fatigues, and no one in the league is more brash or more confident than Joe Theismann. As you recall, I like the Raiders too because I did pick the Raiders to win it all. But I have no doubts that the Hogs, the Smurfs, the Fun Bunch, Riggins, and Theismann will be right back in the thick of things next year.
No, Len, I can't disagree with you at all. I guess what we're saying is that both teams are class football teams. Our Offensive Player of the Year was not at the top of his game when he played on Super Sunday. But when you look at the entire season, he certainly is #1. Now let's take a look at part 1 of HBO's Best of the Year.
Joe Theismann of the Washington Redskins is HBO's choice for Offensive Player of the Year. The decision was a difficult one to make. Theismann gets the nod over Super Bowl MVP Marcus Allen. The Raider running back was great in the playoffs, but had a relatively mediocre year overall. Not so Joe Theismann. Leading the Redskins to the Super Bowl for the second straight season, the former Notre Dame All-American firmly established himself among the hierarchy of great NFL passers. Washington had it all. Great receivers, great line, great runner. But it was Theismann who triggered the highest scoring attack in the NFL. And except for the Super Bowl, he seemed to play his best in the games that meant the most to his team. Theismann received accolades from every source. Roger Staubach called his 1983 performance nearly perfect. Dick Vermeil pegged him the class of the league. And former teammate Sonny Jurgensen said he is unqualifiedly the best quarterback in football today. As his opponents discovered for the second year in a row, Joe Theismann is a winner. There were plenty of candidates for Defensive Player of the Year. Number 58, Jack Lambert, the Steelers' great middle linebacker, continued as an impact player. Lambert made the Pro Bowl for the 9th straight year. A youngster who made great strides as an intimidating defensive force was Seattle's number 45, safety Kenny Easley. In only his second season out of UCLA, Easley can only get better. After 13 seasons in the trenches, the old warhorse of the Rams, Jack Youngblood, is still among the best defensive players in the game. Last year, the defensive end made the difficult switch to the 3-4 alignment and still produced one of his finest seasons. Super Bowl squads featured premier players. The Raiders' Rod Martin finally received All-Pro recognition after 7 years in the league at outside linebacker. And the Redskins' mammoth defensive tackle Dave Butts made his 10th season the best of his career. But our pick for Player of the Year on defense goes to a man many consider the most dominant force in the game, Lawrence Taylor, number 56. The Giants' superstar linebacker simply refuses to be blocked and reaches a quarterback through a combination of agility and sheer strength. '83 was a strange one for Taylor, who lined up both inside and outside and played for one of the poorest teams in the NFL. But it didn't keep Taylor from playing with customary gusto and with the awesome skills that have made him the most destructive defensive force in football. Lawrence Taylor, HBO Sports' choice for Defensive Player of the Year.
It's amazing Lawrence Taylor was able to perform as well as he did with all the controversies surrounding him. A unique case. He signed a future contract with the USFL. Giants decided they really wanted him. They paid off the New Jersey Generals $750,000, turned right around, gave Lawrence a $6.2 million contract. Is he worth it?
Everything is relative, Len. The only thing I know is Don Shula said the Lawrence Taylor and Hugh Green types are so important to the football game that he's going to go out and try and get one in the offseason because they can dominate the game.
Outstanding linebacker like Lawrence Taylor is one element that can turn a team into a winner. There are other elements, and we salute them in Part 2 of HBO's Best of the Year.
The man who makes the Hogs go, the leader of the Smurfs, Pearl Harbor Crew, and the Fun Bunch, is our choice for National Conference Coach of the Year. He is the head coach of the Washington Redskins, Joe Gibbs, who took his team to the NFL's biggest game 2 years in a row. Runner-up in the NFC was Rams rookie coach John Robinson, while in the AFC, the runner-up was the Raiders' Tom Flores, who led the Pride and Poise boys to victory in the Super Bowl. Flores did a fine job, but our nod as AFC Coach of the Year must go to the leader of the Cinderella Team of the Year, the Seattle Seahawks. Coach Chuck Knox turned the team around in a single season and brought them to the playoffs. In the rookie department, the big news was the trials and tribulations of highly publicized quarterback John Elway, who was fanfared into the NFL in a rather rude manner. Elway's first season in the pros was a saga of great ups and downs, mostly downs. But other rookies achieved greater consistency. The Seahawks' Kurt Warner, number 28, led the AFC in rushing and was the biggest reason for his team's ascendancy to the top. He rushed for over 100 yards 6 different times. Dan Marino was an immediate star at quarterback for the Dolphins, despite being the last of 5 quarterbacks picked in the draft's first round. His rifle arm made Miami a different offensive team. A rookie who had immediate success, then tailed off at the end of the year, was number 83, Willie Gault, the Bears' burner of a receiver. But when it came to consistency and outright talent, no one could top our choice for Offensive Rookie of the Year, the Rams' running back Eric Dickerson. The former SMU star rushed for a rookie record 1,808 yards and scored a whopping 20 touchdowns in pacing Los Angeles on their path to the playoffs. No one who saw his smooth striding run can doubt that Dickerson will be among the highest echelon of runners in the history of the NFL. Our choice for Defensive Rookie of the Year is the Colts linebacker Vernon Maxwell, number 56. A second-round draft pick who played under temperamental Colt coach Frank Kush at Arizona State, Maxwell racked up a team-leading 68 solo tackles, which included 11 sacks and 6 forced fumbles. Our comeback player of the year is Billy White Shoes Johnson, who returned from Canada to make some of the most sensational plays of the year. In fact, one of them, which came with just 2 seconds left on the clock against San Francisco, is our play of the year. It is Steve Bartkowski's Hail Mary pass, which split the Georgia night air and somehow ended up in the arms of Billy White Shoes for the winning touchdown. The saga of Dancing Number 81 was one of the most heartwarming and exciting stories in the NFL last season. For that reason, Billy Johnson has earned HBO's honors as Comeback Player of the Year.
We'd like to add our congratulations to HBO's Best of the Year. Nick, the year's over. Your thoughts on it?
Well, Lynn, I think for some teams and fans, mighty disappointing. Teams like Houston, New York Jets, the New York Giants, San Diego, and Tampa Bay, from midway through the season, the only thing their fans had to look forward to was the 1984 draft. And the way the USFL has gone in to pick some of the top collegians like Mike Rozier, the Heisman Trophy winner, when they get down there, the pickings may be mighty slim. But for some other teams, it was a Cinderella year. The Seattle Seahawks, their future was now. They went all the way to the AFC Championship game. Then the 49ers gave the Redskins a big scare. And look at those Los Angeles Rams, Dickerson and company, a great, great year. So for 1983, there were some ups and there were some downs. But for the NFL, it was mostly up.
I look at the 1983 season and I see pro football changing. It's becoming a game of specialization. But there is one ingredient that never changes for a winner, and that is enthusiasm. The Los Angeles Raiders had it in abundance. That's why they're the world champions.
Echo that. The Los Angeles Raiders are the champions, and they really are the best football team in the National Football League. The 1983 season is over, Len, and again, it was great working with you. It was a great year, and I look forward to 84.
Nick, thank you very much, and I echo those sentiments exactly. Thank you for joining us on our show this entire year. We've really enjoyed it. We hope you have too, and we hope we'll see you again next year.
From the neons turn the dark to day. I mean, this ball game does not belong to Providence.